Chapter 22, Lawful Oaths and Vows. Verse 1. Lawful oaths are part of religious worship. On proper occasions, believers may solemnly swear and call God to witness that what they assert or promise is true. And they may ask God to judge them according to the truth or falsehood of what they swear.
Great. Ming, can you read the next one?
The name of God only is that by which man ought to swear, and therein it is to be used with all holy fear and reverence. Therefore, to swear vanly or rashly by that glorious and dreadful name, or to swear to all by any other thing, is sinful and to be abhorred. Yet, as in manners of weight and moment, an oath is warranted by the word of God, under the New Testament as well as under the Old. So a lawful oath being imposed by a lawful authority in such matters ought to be taken.
Thank you. Next, Andrew.
Whoever takes an oath ought to consider seriously the great importance of such a solemn act, and in doing so should affirm nothing but what he himself is fully convinced is the truth. A person may bind himself by oath only to what is good and just, what he believes to be such, and what he is able and resolved to perform.
Okay. Is that it? There's nothing more after that, Andrew?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Okay. So there's one more part where it says it is a sin to refuse an oath touching anything that is good and just being imposed by lawful authority. Okay, great. Next, let's see who's next. Daniel, can you read number 4?
Yeah, number 4 reads, an oath is to be taken in the plain and common sense of the words without equivocation or mental reservation. It cannot oblige to sin, but in anything not sinful being taken, it binds to performance, although to a man's own hurt, nor is it to be violated, although made to heretics or infidels.
Great. Next, Alex, can you do number 5?
Can I switch apps? Can you guys still hear me? You guys can hear me now still?
Yeah.
Okay. A vow is of the like nature with a promissory oath and ought to be made with the like righteous or religious care and to be performed with the like faithfulness.
Great. And then Samuel, can you read number 6?
6, right? Wait.
Yep.
Okay, 6. All right. Okay, can you able to hear me? Okay. It is not to be made to any creature but to God alone, and that it may be accepted. It is to be made voluntarily out of faith and conscience of duty, in way of thankfulness for mercy received, or for the obtaining of what we want, whereby we more strictly bind ourselves to necessary duties or to other things so far and so long as they may unfitly conduce thereunto.
Right. I'll read the last one. No man may vow to do anything forbidden in the word of God, or what would hinder any duty therein commanded, or which is not in his own power, and for the performance whereof he has no promise of ability from God. in which respects popish monastical vows of perpetual single life, professed poverty, and regular obedience are so far from being degrees of higher perfection that they are superstitious and sinful snares in which no Christian may entangle himself. All right, great. Why don't we go back to number 1 and yeah, okay. So let's see, Steve, can you just share with us
Yeah.
number 1, summarize number 1.
Okay. Well, it says the lawful oaths are part of religion worship, and depending on the occasion, a person should swear and call God as a witness. So he can be judged by this person's statement or actions before God. Yeah.
Okay, let me just real quick ask you guys, well, maybe what I could do first is by looking at number 7, it mentions some oaths that are not necessary, or actually they are sinful if we take such an oath. So for example, what oaths should you not take? So for example, one would be like a perpetual single life. And this is specifically with regards to like the like people are having to take such vows if they're in a particular position or things like that. So if like one particular vow would be like just being single for the rest of your life to serve God, maybe. Another one would be the vow to like be poor, profess poverty. And the other one would be like regular obedience. So we could talk about these, but then let me ask this question. What I wanted to do was I wanted to ask, what are some vows that we do take these days? Like, is this even relevant to us? What are some vows that we might take these days in the church? What do you guys think?
Well, it depends on the church. There are some churches that do that. There are other churches that don't, and I think there are good reasons to not. But I think if you're looking at what the Westminster Confession of Faith was saying, their tradition was to do this, and it would involve like marriage vows. It would involve the commitment to the church as you do in your own church there. I happen to disagree with that, but I will let others, give their own views and later I'll chime in because I don't want to, I want everybody to think it over and follow what where you would like them to go first before I say anything.
Okay, so Daniel brought up marriage vows. Okay, so we do take vows, we take an oath before God, before others, to be married to the other person and to be faithful to the person till death do us part, right? Yes. So that is one vow that we do take. whether or not you're from a particular tradition of Christianity. Everyone that gets married in the church will be taking some kind of vow when they get married. And so we do take that vow. And, you know, actually there aren't many vows that we see in the church these days, but one other vow that we take at our church, just for example, would be the vows that members take before the church. The vow to be a part of the church, to stand in front of the church and to say that I'm committing myself to this church and I do believe in Jesus Christ and I'm confessing my faith in front of the church. And even if a church is not like a Presbyterian church, there might be a Baptist type of church where they don't necessarily call it a vow, but then what they do is that they, in a way, they have to give a testimony before they get baptized in front of the church. And so them giving their testimony is a way of vowing that they do really believe in Jesus Christ. And so these are the kinds of vows that we do see in our church, in our churches these days. But honestly, there aren't as many vows, and this is not like normally practiced. Although like even in scripture, we may not see it that often, but we do see people here and there that have taken certain vows, like a vow to fast a certain number of days, or a vow to cut off their hair and to live like a person devoted to God, called like a Nazarite, or to refrain themselves from doing something, like we see Paul doing for a period of time. And so there may be these types of vows that we see, not just in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. And so this is what this is talking about, so that I just wanted to bring up this question so that we're clear about what we're talking about when we talk about oaths and vows. And basically this is like standing in front of people saying, I promise something, something, something before God and before all of you. Right?
Does this mean it's only for in front of the church members, or could it be like in front of like other people, just in general?
So we want to be talking, I mean, that's a good question.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Right,
They
right.
have
So there
changed
are
that.
cases.
They've changed
Say
that
it
to,
again?
do you swear or affirm? Affirm, which would be, I think, a good distinction. Because you're saying, do you just say that? Is your yes, yes, and your no, no?
Right.
That's the idea, I think. People objected to saying they swear on the Bible. Well, this is a very solemn thing. And they said, okay, you swear or affirm in some jurisdictions, not all.
Yeah. So there are, I think it'd be good just to go back to number one. Yes, we do take oaths and vows outside of the church. But number one is we're wanting to be a little bit more specific. And so it says a lawful oath is part of religious worship. And this is where we do swear something, and we're calling God to be a witness. So this is a little bit more confined to what we're talking about within the church. And you know, one thing to point out is, what do you guys think? Let me just double check here again. Yeah, what do you guys think about like marriage in Taiwan? Where, and this is not just Taiwan, but it's in other places also. What do you guys think about the difference between getting married with the government, where you just go and you register? Is that the actual marriage, or is the marriage before God in a worship service being performed in front of God's people? well, I should say more than just in front of God's people, but being performed in the presence of God.
Can we say neither? I mean, can we say that really God looks on the heart and he sees that marriage as an inward thing that the people in their hearts commit? And surely, I think you and I and everybody who gets married publicly, we go before God privately and we say those same things, I think. I don't know. Is that true, do you think?
What do you guys think, the rest of you guys?
Don't all talk at once, you know. Just can't hear you.
So you could talk about Daniel's question,
Yeah.
but you can also talk about my original question too. Yeah, what do you think?
If Daniel says he's right, it depends on heart. Then I think we don't need that kind of ceremony anymore. We don't have to go to register, and we don't have to make a vows at church. I think.
Okay. Others?
Can I share?
Sure.
Please.
I mean, I think depends whether you're a believer or a non-believer. If you grew up, if you're non-Christian, it's not of course, you know, marriage is such a sacred lifetime commitment. So, but then for them, they don't need to go. They don't need to take the vow in the presence of God. They don't need to go to church. They're not accustomed to the church ceremony. So for the secular people, it's not their obligation. They don't have this kind of rituals and ceremonies. But I think for us as Christians, definitely you want to go to church. You want to in front of pastors, in front of our pastors, and do the marriage vows. You know, and that's the typical, more like the Western way. But in Taiwan, it's not. You can just go to the Qigong store. You can just you don't need to. So depending, if you live in Taiwan, it's such a secular, it is like Buddhism, but you know, they don't have anything. So it's not, depends, you know, culturally very different. So it's not their obligation to do this.
Yeah. So let's talk in terms of Christians, not in terms of the non-Christians.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As Christians, yes, making a vow. I mean, marriage vows in front of God, in front of I mean the entire church congregation. And yeah, I think it's mandatory.
I think it's pretty difficult to disentangle the cultural setting of the New Testament and what God is really telling us about vows and these issues. Like Paul says about Timothy, talking about his conversion, he says, "You made this great confession among many witnesses." So he's actually putting some great importance upon the fact that there were witnesses to his confession of faith. And so there's this issue of in antiquity of making a public display or a confession of what you believe or what you intend to do. And I think it's hard for us to say, well, that actually was something God wanted, or is it more something that human beings through culture have come up with and God's okay with it? You know, he's okay with it because there are a host of witnesses looking down on us, and what we do before them, and so that's important to God too. But it's hard. I just don't think that there's any real clear line in the Bible telling you this is why Jesus says don't make any vows, and this is why Deuteronomy says make a vow, just make sure you keep it. I don't really know. You know, if you go back to Deuteronomy, we're just like, why is that there? And then Jesus says, you know, the old people said exactly what they said in Deuteronomy, And I'm telling you, don't do that. And so the general principle he's getting across, I think, which is a different debate for a different part of this conversation, has to do with, are you going to keep your vow or not? And as a human being, we tend to break our word because we don't control all the circumstances, nor do we see the future. And this is why sometimes for me, these religious issues of vows have to do with kind of a display of my faith or a display of this. Take into consideration that during the Westminster faith, when it was being drafted, there was an oath of allegiance to the king that they had to give, every one of them. So to say that oaths were not valid would be to go against the government's, the king himself, and say that the oath to the king was something they didn't need to do. It's a political pressure that happens to be on the people now that doesn't exist today, right? We don't have that kind of political pressure telling us that there are these oaths that we have to keep to a king. So I think that there are other reasons behind all this.
Alex, you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact answer. I'm just thinking out loud. But in terms of government versus in the church, for Christians, I don't know, I think it should be in the church, but I'm not sure if it's limited to it. Especially like my brother, I think he got officially married just by signing the contract. He didn't actually have like a ceremony in church, but then also I think it's pretty important to have witnesses in the church, because not to like prove yourself or to show your faith, but also to have accountability. Maybe that like you're not just making like weird vows. You know what I mean? It's like something that's grounded or based on the gospel. It's not like a vow of just random stuff or whatever you want it to be.
But let me ask you this, Alex. Let's say a man has vowed to marry a woman before many witnesses. Do you think that the witnesses that were there, he's going to remember that when he's thinking about divorcing the woman? And that will be the reason why he stays in any measure. I happen to think that's not going to happen unless you really are living to please men and not your own conscience. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I don't really think of it as that way, but more about like other people that were witnesses can also help you keep accountable. Like if they see you acting a certain way or being not faithful, they can bring it up to you and show you like, hey, like, what are you doing?
So you think it has to do with the witness's responsibility more than the individual who makes the vow?
I just think it's a part of it. I don't know. Again, like I don't really know the exact answer. I'm just not thinking out loud.
No, I mean, I think that's a valid way of looking at it, what you said, that the witnesses are there to keep the person accountable, and it's actually a responsibility on their part to be checking that and to be looking after that person. It's like the church vows. The church vows say, I promise to do this, I promise to do that, and then we see that person, they're walking unruly. Is it our obligation to go to that person and say, for your own sake, because of the vow, I think you need to keep that? Or is it because out of love for that person, we want to encourage them to continue to keep the vow that they're keeping? What are these motives that are involved, I guess, what I'm thinking.
Well, let's bring it back to the discussion with number 1 and number 2 now. And I think this discussion is good. And one of the things that Daniel was bringing up early on was that, what it comes down to is really, what's your heart? Like, he brought up the James passage about just letting your yes be yes and your no, no.
Actually,
that's important.
This one here, in the chat, is the Matthew 5:33. That was the one I was talking.
Okay.
Because I think he's quoting Deuteronomy, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so whenever we talk about what was being taught during that time, we have to keep in mind, like, what was the intention So Daniel, once in a while you do bring up these Matthew 5 passages, and we have to keep in mind that what Jesus was trying to teach is not, this is the new law now. But what Jesus was trying to teach was he came to perfect the law and also to show that it's impossible for us to actually keep the law, and we need Jesus. That's the reason why we need Jesus in our lives. Now, and so, you know, if Jesus says, go cut off your, gouge out your eye, you know, it doesn't mean that we're supposed to go and actually do that. What it means is that he's trying to make a point about the severity and the fact that we're not, eventually he's pointing to the fact that we're not able to follow perfectly.
Right.
So similar thing with this oath idea, because even if Jesus talks about don't take any oaths, it doesn't necessarily mean he's canceling out all of the practices that the people were doing at that time. What it does mean is that he's pointing to the very idea that you're saying, which is just be honest and just do what you say you're going to do.
Well, I guess I would agree with in principle that he's saying that there's a general principle he's getting across, which has to do with people making oaths flippantly or calling upon the name of God and saying that's going to make the difference. If I didn't say it that way, well, then I could have lied. But I don't think that's what he's saying. And the reason why I don't think that he's saying is because if I go back to Ecclesiastes, Solomon says the very same thing in different words. And he says in 5:4, 5:5 of Ecclesiastes, when you make a vow to God, don't delay in fulfilling it because he takes no pleasure in fools. Okay? And the idea is, if you're going to make a vow to God, you must fulfill it. There's no out. And that's what Deuteronomy says. But then he says this. He says, fulfill your vow. It is better not to vow than to make a vow and not fulfill it. Now, most people read that as, okay, so that doesn't mean I can't do any vows. It means that I can still do vows that I happen to fulfill or that I want to fulfill. But if that were the case, he would not say it's better not to vow, which is what Jesus is saying. He's basically saying there is too much risk in vowing a vow to God because of who God is and what the penalty is for not keeping your vow. And also because you don't know the future and you cannot absolutely do what you say as God only can do. See, only God can make a vow and fulfill it because we don't control the weather, we don't control our health, we don't control a million reasons why tomorrow I won't keep my vow. And if I don't keep my vow, the penalty is dire, it's death. Just as in the law, it was death. And this is why I personally, I don't criticize anybody who does a vow. I don't personally, I don't vow, and I tell my son don't vow. But again, this is for a matter of conscience for those who will vow.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have to say just very directly that I disagree with your interpretation.
I know.
And if we come up with more rules, I think there is a danger of becoming more like a Pharisee.
But that's the rule, though. The rule is you should vow. I'm saying you don't have to, and you shouldn't. See, the rule is someone telling me I must vow for my marriage to be valid. I must vow to impress the church that I actually will love them. I personally don't believe that. I think that's the rule. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but I hear it the other way. I hear you
conscience.
saying the rule now, because of what Jesus said, is that we shouldn't vow.
No.
We shouldn't make a vow.
No, I don't read what Jesus is saying that way. I read what Jesus is saying as leaving to the hearer this issue of whatever is more than that comes of evil. And what does he mean by whatever is more than that comes of evil? And the issue is one of pride for me. And because human beings are tempted by pride, And because we sometimes believe we can do things we cannot do. In my own case, and I impose this on no person at all, other than my own son, who I prefer not to make a vow. I don't do that. And I find it interesting that in the law, the father of a young lady can disavow her vow while she is still in his house, because God is in heaven and we are in his house. And when we make vows, he can certainly disavow them too. And I find that interesting, that that little aspect is there, because the woman is likely to make a foolish vow. This is the implication, I think. What do you think about that?
About the father and the daughter?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it doesn't necessarily point to the idea of making a foolish vow, but it points to the idea of the authority of the father in a woman's life. And
Yes.
so it's not talking about the foolishness of vows, and so the implication is shouldn't be brought out in a way where we're talking about the foolishness of our vows. It should be for that particular version, it's about the authority of the father, the authority of the man. Now, again, I think that you can read it that way for yourself if you want, but I would not teach it the way that you're speaking right now. Because again, it just sounds like without saying this is a new rule, you're saying if you're not taking into account the severity of taking a vow and not holding on to the vow and not fulfilling the vow, then you're bringing judgment upon yourself. It's basically saying the new Christian teaching is to not take vows.
But I'm saying that the Christian teaching is to have a better understanding of what you are doing before God. That's my view of it.
Yeah. Okay. So then, are you saying that it's okay for people to take vows, or are you saying people should not take vows?
What I'm saying is that the person who takes a vow has to make a determination of who they're vowing to and whether or not they are willing to take that risk. Every human being has to make the decision for him or herself. That's what I'm saying.
And what is
That's
that risk about?
The risk is that you don't realize who you're dealing with when you vow to God, and that you will become flippant or make promises or make vows without a due consideration of who you're vowing to. And for me, it's one of avoiding danger, making no provision for the flesh, if you will, or
right.
having
So
a
even
conflict.
with that idea, sorry, Daniel.
Sure.
Even with that idea, I just want to try to point out to you that even with your way of understanding this idea, there's a sense of pride in there also. There's a sense of, I want to avoid danger myself. I have to understand who I'm making my vow to. And if I do understand these things, then I won't take that risk, and I will be able to save myself from that kind of danger. There's a sense of pride in there also.
I'm sorry. I have to interrupt you guys
because go ahead, me.
Yeah, the conversation you have right now is too fast for me. I couldn't understand both of your points. So yeah, I think we should move on. We should keep this, and we should move on to
thank you, me.
Next part.
Yeah. So just I guess for everyone here, what we want, the reason why we want to discuss oaths and vows is because it is something that is talked about in scripture, and Daniel has brought up a passage from Matthew 5, and I would just encourage you guys to consider what he said, and search the scriptures again yourself, and try to understand what would be a way of understanding oaths and vows in the church today. And again, like I said, when we do take oaths and vows in the church, usually it's in the context of marriage. And for our church, it's in the context of vowing to be a member of the church. All right, so let's go to number 2 then. And who was the one that was supposed to do that for us? Maybe me.
That's me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Number 2.
Or was that Ming or was that Daniel?
Oh,
No,
that's me.
I was. no,
That's
I
me.
could've-
That's me. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Number 2 says, if a man, he need to swear, and he must obey what he has said with holy fear and reverence. I think that's indicates the heart. And other than that, it's all sinful. Like wait a second. Yeah, so it basically says we need to swear by the word of God and in the God's name.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we have to obey it. Well,
Right.
we need to obey it. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Ming. Yeah, so actually this point makes the point that I think Daniel was trying to make, which is a person really needs to consider that when they take their vow, it needs to be done understanding who you're taking your vow to or with. Someone was going to say something?
I would say that Daniel also mentioned the verse 3 already.
Okay, so who is number 3? Okay, Andrew, yeah, can you give a summary of number 3?
I think my version is lack of the last sentence, number 3. So I need to. Could someone pass the whole?
Yeah, I think we put it in the chat already.
But here's the one you're missing. That's
Okay.
the last part.
Okay, I saw
Okay.
it. Whoever takes and
No, not that one. Go down to, yet it is a sin to refuse.
Yes.
That's the last one. There's the one before that's Ecclesiastes.
thank you.
While he's thinking about number 3, can you summarize number 2 again?
Number 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, so so when people do swear or take an oath or a vow, they should take a vow in God's name. And so, you know, like in the church when we take a vow for our wedding vow, or yeah, they're gonna say, you know, I vow this and this and that, and then we seal it with God's name, like you know, so let this be so in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. And so that's what number 2 is basically talking about. If you're gonna make a vow, then do it in the presence of God and do it in God's name, and keep in mind the weightiness of the vow that you're taking.
Okay, so for number 3, I think we have to take a consideration of the serious of making a vow, and man shouldn't make a vow unless it's convinced to be good and just. But if it's convinced to be good and just, and by lawful authority, and you refuse to vow, it is a sin also.
Yeah, that one I have a tough time with, because there's a rule for you. Then you got to read James, and this is where I really don't understand, Pastor. You gotta. I don't know what the interpretation you have of James, but James is saying here, this is like, but above all, please don't do this. Neither by any other oath. I mean, he's just like completely categorical about this. You know, for me, that's I take that to be weightier than what I read here. I take James as telling us, this isn't for you. This isn't for you. Don't do this. And that reminds me of the one in Ecclesiastes where he says, do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin. Because he had these guys in the congregation who were like, oh, we're going to go to the next village and we're going to make this money. And, you know, and they were boasting, right? It had to do with boasting. But that's the context. But he's very categorical. His statement goes beyond that for me. And this is where I have my trouble. I don't mean to be proud. I really don't. I just, when I read these things, Pastor, I come away with this understanding. And I don't see, I haven't been convinced otherwise, I guess.
Yeah. So again, I think that when we are talking about passages like, say, that come from James also, James is very direct and very, even at times it sounds a little bit on the extreme side. And it sounds a little bit contradictory at times to other parts of scripture. And so we have to understand James from a particular point of view. And so it's not like just a flat rule, but again, the meaning behind it is just be honest. I don't think what it's saying is that, you know, you're not supposed to take any oath, but once again, it's the idea, and I think this is what you're saying too. It's more of the be warned not to take oaths like so easily, flippantly. If you're going to take an oath, then make sure that you're being honest about that oath and that you're going to do your best to carry it out.
But you know, it's not about your best college try. It's about if you don't fulfill that oath, you die. You fall into condemnation. This is what he's saying.
Right. And that's the thing, Daniel, for just many of our conversations, I just want to say that we can talk about all these rules as much as we want. And we can do our best to be the best Christian as much as possible. But the fact is that the gospel tells us over and over again that we're going to fail. As Christians, we're going to fail in whether or not we take an oath or whether or not we keep our eyes away from lusting. We're going to fail in all of these things. And so the point is not to do these things, or rather the point is not to do your best to live a Christian life and to follow this law, like don't take any vows. But the idea is that as you look to Christ, then when you do take a vow, you want to do it with the right heart. But not because you're able to, but with what God has given to you, you keep that in mind, and with the idea, knowing that Christ will forgive you even if you fail, you do your best as a person that's receiving love from the Lord.
Okay, but what I'm trying to say is that for me, it's very simple. The vow is a mirror image of the law. Okay, the mirror image of the law, because you're saying, I will perform it, and if I don't do it, I die. The not taking a vow is saying, I'm free of that death that would follow my putting down a rule that if I violated, I would die. And this is what the vow actually sums up in a very clear sense what Paul is talking about in Romans 3 about where there is no law, there is no transgression. Whereas where there is a law, the transgression will bring death. And so the Christian is, when he lives by the idea of not taking a vow, he's saying, I understand, for me, I understand the principle of not putting myself under a performance obligation to God in which I die. Because the reason why we are alive is because he took a vow by his own self, not with us. We made no vow with him in exchange. He vowed for his own namesake and swore by his namesake that he would perform it, the oath. It's precisely the gospel that says, you're free because I decided to do this for you, and I have to have faith in his performing the vow, not in my performance of any kind. Does that make sense?
Right.
You know?
Right. So the next step after that is to see that Jesus did fulfill the vow for us.
Yeah.
And then now, because of what Christ did, we also can live our lives doing our best to fulfill whatever vow. You see, it doesn't just stop with, because Jesus did this, I don't have to do this. What it means is that because Jesus did this, now I live my life according to what pleases God. And sometimes what that means is that even as I take a vow, I'm going to do my best to live my life in a way to please God, not to save myself, but because I want to live my life for the Lord.
Okay,
out of joy and appreciation.
I agree with that principle. But the point that he says is, then he says, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. So he's telling you, you can still say you will do something and not do something. There's nobody telling you to just hold your mouth shut and say, no, I won't say anything or promise anything. I won't do anything. I'll just stand still. He's not saying that. He's saying you can still do that, but just do not put yourself under the law that I came to fulfill for you. Because in the law is the vow.
I still disagree with your understanding of vow and how you broaden that out to make it equated to the law. Alex has been waiting patiently. Alex, you have a thought?
Sorry, Alex. I didn't see the hand.
Vow and oath. Because I think the first 4 points or so, they talk about oath, but we've been talking about vows. And is there like a major difference that we should be discussing about them or not?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sorry, I cannot hear Alex clearly. So would you, Peter, could you just?
Yeah, Alex is asking if there's a difference between a vow and an oath. Is that right? Yeah. So I have to admit that I think I am being a little bit careless here. And I've just been understanding a vow and an oath as 2 similar things. And perhaps they've divided it into 2 separate things. But in my general understanding, I understand an oath and a vow as pretty similar things. Let me look at this again. And maybe what I need to do is I need to study this again and then get back to you guys as to what difference may exist between the 2.
honestly, I think it had to do with, and I haven't studied it fully, but I think I remember reading the Old Testament term in Hebrew had to do with a covenant. The issue being one of agreeing with God or making a covenant with God. This is the word Brit Milah, is the word in Hebrew. And Milah refers to the ceremony and Brit is the promise. And I think it's good to go back and research this, but I think it has to do with the covenant.
I have a question. So,
Sure.
so when we are talking about baptism, or is this a vow or is this a oath?
Yeah. So if there is a difference in these two terms, I would say it doesn't matter what you call it. If there's not a difference. If there is a difference, then again, I'd have to study a little bit more deeply to see what the writers of this had in mind when they were dividing these two into two separate ideas. But if I were to take a guess right now, I would say that it's more of a vow.
The Brit is actually, Brit Milah refers to the circumcision. So I would imagine that the baptism would qualify as that kind of thing. Because the ritual of the Brit, of the covenant, was in the circumcision itself. That's what they called it, a covenant. So if you go back, I haven't studied it enough, I admit. So I will try.
So is your understanding that that's a vow or an oath?
Vow and oath are the same things when you're swearing to God. The idea is that forswear or swear, oath, vow. I think they're all the same thing, though the technical term for vow is this Brit word in Hebrew. I don't know what it is in the Greek. Like when Jacob, the thing with the rock, right, where he promises God, if you go with me and you're with me all the time, I'll give you 10% of what I got, right? He's making a Brit, a vow. And it says he vowed a vow, which is the same as swear an oath in the English, I guess. Like oath is a modern word.
Yeah, I'll just say, so thank you, Daniel. I think what you're saying is that they're basically the same thing.
I think so. You're wrong.
Yeah. So once again, I'll have to study this a little bit more carefully to let you know. And looking at number 5 now, it does look like there's a distinction that's made between oath and vow, where starting from number 5, it's defining what a vow is as opposed to an oath. It says is of the like nature with a promissory oath, and it ought to be made with a like religious care and to be performed with a like faithfulness. So again, it seems like they're making a distinction there.
Yeah, it has to do with the object, right? Probably has to do with what's involved, right? A person, a thing, if it's before God, if it's not.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Maybe what we can do is just go through the rest of this and just get the basic idea of each one, and then I'll get back to you guys about the difference between oath and vow. Right. So why don't we, let's see, did we talk about number 3? Yes, we were talking about number 3 already. And then what about number 4? Who was number 4?
I may have been.
But,
I don't remember.
yeah, was that you, Daniel?
Perhaps. An oath, yeah, that's. So I guess what this is talking about is the manner in which you take the oath and the summarizing. And it should not, the content of it should not be sinful. and it cannot be violated whether you vow before no one in the presence of God alone, or whether it's when you vow in a public sense, or if the person you're vowing to is an unbeliever. So you don't get a pass because they don't believe what you believe. You have to perform the oath.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you have to perform the oath, and you have to be clear about what your oath is about. Yeah. Number 5, then. I think that was Alex.
Yeah, that was me. I mean, from what I got from it, it just seems like that vows and oaths are similar in their nature,
Mm-hmm.
or with their, I guess, or their intent in the context of us Christians, like in the manner, I guess.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So then number 6.
Okay, it's my turn.
Mm-hmm.
Where should I? Okay. I think well, to put it in a nutshell, I think just like what Pastor Peter's saying is that yeah, I mean, taking oath or taking the vow is, you know, you take it, do not take oath so easily. So here is talking about only to God alone, I guess. And the other part is, I mean, of course, I mean, it's a no-brainer. You don't make to any creature or any other, but to God alone. And then maybe Pastor Peter, you can help me out here. I don't know the rest, but I think the main point is when God created this vow or oath, is you're basically you're only making the vow to God, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, and then like the rest of the part, like I mean, I don't know like the other English, but I think we're only making a vow to God, and whether it's like a marriage vow or anything, but only God, only to God alone.
Mm.
Is there
Okay.
anything
Yeah.
Is there anything else that I can add?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Thank you. And then number 7. No man may vow to do anything forbidden in the word of God. Okay, so when you do make a vow, you want to vow according to what is right and good, according to what God's word says. And basically don't make any foolish vow that you're not going to be able to carry out. And there are some vows that are unnecessary. It says here they're superstitious, and they can be a place where temptation is great. They have sinful snares. So don't take such vows. You know, I'm trying to quickly read through. So some of you guys might know about Ligonier, R.C. Sproul. And if you look on ligonier.org, they do explain some things about some of these, about the Westminster Confession of Faith, some of the topics in there. And here it doesn't, I was just glancing over it, and it didn't, I don't think it made a distinction between oaths and vows. But then as I was reading, I was thinking, I wonder if oaths are a little bit more closely related to things that you take an oath on, like in public. And vows are maybe something that are a little bit more, it could be public, vows can be public, but then they might be more, they can be private also. But an oath, and I may be wrong about this, but just as I'm reading it, I'm guessing, could this be the distinction where oaths are a little bit more public in nature? And
in number 5, Pastor, it says vow like a promissory oath. So it's kind of saying a vow and a promissory oath are similar, which leads me to believe that promissory oath had to do with something like getting into debt with somebody. You promissory note, right? You promise somebody that you pay them back. That's not like a vow is like, I am going to do this and I'm telling you this. Whereas the other one is, let's get into a contract and I promise to pay you back as a part of condition of the contract. So I think that's the small distinction that you see there, where two things are similar, which leads me to believe that there's something other than a promissory oath, which might be what you're talking about. An oath that is made publicly that is not a private contract between two individuals, or where you're not giving your word that something you will perform something. That's what I don't know either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for clarifying the word promissory there for everyone. Yeah, that may be the distinction that it's talking about. Yeah, I guess let me just apologize for not having looked at this a little bit more carefully. So I will look at this a little bit more, and then I will get back to you guys about the specific distinction.
Okay, may I have make some comments or questions?
Sure.
Actually? Well,
sure.
I grew up in a Catholic environment in Brazil, so I constantly, since I was child, I was listen to the vowels, or the votes. I mean, not vote, vowels. Sorry. In Portuguese, they say voto. Yeah, voto. Yeah. That means for election, right? But it's the same word. It's the same word, but different meaning for election and different meaning. Vows. Yeah, in terms of biblical meaning is different. In my understanding, well, their understanding, the Catholics' understanding, is they make vowels. Sorry, they make vowels to in order to obtain something, like to get something from God. It's kind of bargaining sometimes. Yeah, and so there are sometimes they go to a place to pay the promise. So like they go up the stairs, a very long stairs, like I don't know, 500 steps, and on their knees to pay the promise that they make, for example. So in my conception, this is very Catholic, but not necessary. I mean, because in the book, I forgot where, in Samuel or whatever, there is the history of, I think it was Jephthah. He went to a battle, and then I think he won the battle, but he made a promise, a vow, like he would sacrifice, that we don't know if literally or not, maybe not literally, he would sacrifice the first person he see when he go back to his village, and he saw his daughter, and he sacrificed his daughter's lives. So there's two interpretations: literally and maybe not literally. So he couldn't marry. So if not literally, she couldn't marry anymore. She should dedicate her life totally for a God's work, for example. So in this case, it doesn't matter literally or not. We are discussing the vows that Jephthah made.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I'm looking at a few other sources here, and let me just clarify. Try to clarify. Again, this is just by quickly glancing at stuff, so I need to still study a little bit more. But I was looking at the word promissory, and normally for me, when I think of the word promissory, it's going to have something to do with some kind of debt and some type of promise of paying it back. But promissory doesn't necessarily have to do with debt. It just means a promise, something that's promised. And so I'm looking at another site here, reformation21.org, and it says, this is what it says: an oath involves both men and God. Usually when a person makes a promise to another and invokes God as a witness. A vow, as opposed to an oath, a vow is a promise made to God. And this is why we promise before God to keep our wedding vows. They are first and foremost promises made to God that we will treat our spouses in a godly manner. And so the distinction that this makes is, I think, similar to what I was thinking earlier, which was an oath is something that's done more publicly. It's before man, before other people, and before God. But a vow is something that could be just more private, just me promising something to God, me wanting to do something for God. So like a wedding vow, someone asked where a wedding vow might fall, it would fall under vow. And the distinction is between, like, am I doing it publicly before other people, or is it just a private matter, like my own vow before God? Yeah. So a public vow would be more maybe like that idea. I promise to pay you back, and I'm invoking God's name in this situation.
The idea for me is one of performance and reliance. So you perform, you have to perform something, and the other party is relying on you performing. In the case of God, obviously, he's not relying on you, but in a contract, it's that. It's called a reliance. So you give me a promise, I'm relying on that. So that's why I gave you my promise. So it's an exchange, one thing for another. This is just in pure legal terms, I'm thinking. It's just the issue of performing something. Whereas I think, for instance, you are under oath, you're performing that which you said you were going to do. You're not going to swear falsely. So that's a promissory oath, if you will. What I'd like to know is what is not a promissory oath? Because they seem to make a distinction about that. I think we could both agree that vow and oath have to do with performing something. So I want to know what the other one is. I swear it's true, I did this thing, right? Or I did this other thing. That wouldn't be a promissory oath, right? You're not promising to tell the truth. You're just saying what I'm saying is true. I can handle that one, right? Because I know if I'm telling the truth or a lie, right? I can handle that kind of oath, no problem. Under this issue that we were talking earlier, because
yeah,
do you understand the distinction between those? Because I certainly can see that. And I can see why they're making a big deal about performing something.
Right. Fulfilling whatever promise you've made to do.
Right.
Right. As opposed to just, I swear to God something is true.
Right.
That would be just a linguistic matter. I think just a way of just trying to emphasize that what I'm saying is true. Garden
variety oath, I guess. The easiest thing. Affirming something.
Yeah, Ming, did you want to say something?
Yes. So now I have just a question comes to my mind when we have been discussing this. So if we constantly felt that there was always a moment that we reject Jesus, then we also need to make a public vow. I think it's really contradict to each other. And if we don't make a vow, and how do we let people know that we trust God? But at the same time, we also fail in short. Just there was always a moment we sin against other people. Yeah, that's my question.
So, sorry, can you repeat your question maybe in a shorter way?
Yes, I'm asking, yeah, if we make a vow, but we actually there was always a moment that we sing, and when we sing during that time, are we against this vow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing that maybe the world will not understand, but as Christians, the way that we can understand is if we made a vow or an oath. I just checked on another website and they make a similar distinction as the Reformation 21 between the two. Whether we make an oath or a vow, the fact is that we might not be able to fulfill that vow. And as much as we try, we might not be able to fulfill that vow. Now, the thing about Christianity is that we know we're going to fail. And so if we do fail, we are going to fail. What God calls us to is to repent of our sin, to confess our sin, and then go back to the Lord. And then once our relationship with God, we remember the promises of the gospel, and we say, oh yeah, Jesus Christ has already forgiven me. Then after that, what we want to do is, as we remember the gospel, we want to live out our lives trying again to fulfill the vow. And so what that means in a real life situation is that if I'm not able to fulfill the vow or an oath, say it's to another person, if I'm not able to fulfill it, then it's me willing to say, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do this. And I'm also willing to take any consequence for me not being able to fulfill it. But also, if there is a chance, then I'm willing to try again to fulfill it. But again, I'm willing to confess and admit I'm not able to fulfill the oath, and I'm willing to take any consequence for that.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Oh, it's me. Yeah, I totally agree with Pastor Kim. With you about Daniel. So I don't know Daniel, but yeah, Daniel brought up a very good point about. But I have to say that I more agree to Pastor Peter, because I think it is very important to make a vow or oath to God. That's if we're so afraid to fail, I mean, human beings are always going to fail. I mean, if we're not sure, I mean, there's always uncertainties. You know, we're not going to fulfill the vow. It's
Right.
it is very likely that human beings. Oh yeah, now we make a vow to God, but eventually, at the end of the day, oh oops, we screw up. But I think as long as we're willing to repent and confess, there's not going to be any risk. I heard Daniel brought a good point, but then I have to disagree. There's not going to be any risk. God, also, yeah, going back to what I said about marriage vows, it's all about the hearts. It's all about your hearts. Like if you want to marry to this lady, it's all about her. But also important, like marriage vow is all about you need the witnesses to be around. So again, going back to Daniel, I think there's no risk. There's no risk. But we as Christians, when we're making vows or oaths to God, just do it.
Okay,
Why there's no yeah, sorry. I mean, I'm just
I
learning,
understand.
but
I understand your point. I understand your point. But my response to that would simply say, if there's no risk, you know that going in, the vow is meaningless. This is the idea, because the issue is one of why are you making a vow? What is the point of this vow? Why are you making an agreement with God about doing something? If in fact there's no risk, there's no agreement really.
Daniel, and also you're saying about human beings are tempted by pride, but it's, I mean, so vice versa. If we choose, I mean, if we feel that vowing to God is a risk, that is a pride too. So there's pride on both sides.
So how is it pride? That's what I want to know. How is it pride?
There's pride. I think that
if I decide, for instance, I'm not going to vow because I really honestly know myself well enough that I could not keep this vow to God, and I don't want to do something that's vain, because if there's no risk, and I'm just naming the name of God, knowing someday I'm just going to go ahead and do that, then what's the point of the vow?
I think
if it's an agreement.
I think making a vow to God is we as Christians we have to do it. Like if you feel, oh, a vow is not necessary, there's like too much risk, we don't want to jeopardize there's going to be, we don't want to face our consequences. I have a heart to confess or repent. Eventually, if we failed or make a mistake again, God understands. God knows our heart. Human beings are not perfect. Sorry,
let me jump in here. Or someone was going to say something.
The only thing I wanted to point out was this issue of Psalm 15, which is talking about Jesus Christ, of course, and not us. And he says in this thing, he ends this, he's talking about who's this perfect person, right? Who's the person that will not be moved? Who is the person that's fulfilling my law, essentially? And he gets to the end and he says, a person that swears to his own hurt and changes not, okay? And who is he talking about? And he's obviously talking about himself. Because when he swears to his own hurt regarding us, because we're going to sin against him and we're going to do everything wrong, it's him that is meant to glorify. You see, that statement about a person who swears and does not change is a glorification of Jesus Christ. So the moment a Christian puts himself in a situation where he says, well, no, I'm going to be that guy, for me personally, as a swearing to God to do that is, for me, is pride. Now, you say that it's proud for me to not do that. Okay, I'll accept your opinion. I happen to think that I'm trying to honor Christ, and I'm trying to say, you're that person, and nobody else is that person in my life. And that's how I see you. You're the one that swore, and there are no more agreements to be made. You did it all. This is how I see it. I don't mean to be, I don't tell other people they must do what I do. I don't tell them that a vow means nothing. In fact, quite the contrary. If somebody came to me and said, I vowed something, I would say, well, you better do it, because it's a matter of conscience, ultimately. It's a matter of your conscience. And I'm not your conscience, right?
Can you say something?
Sure, please.
Yeah.
I'm asking.
I'll just jump in here just
advice,
because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Besides Daniel or Samuel, was there anyone else that wanted to say something? I think I heard a voice, but I'm not sure.
Well, I would say, my opinion, the oath should be done maybe in a specific occasions, and very few, like a marriage, or maybe when the elders, they are assuming some taking responsibility in the church.
That's a good example too.
Yeah. But beside this, I would think like Daniel. I wouldn't swear or take oaths. I don't need to. So just say yes, or yeah, nay, nay. I don't know the words in English, whatever. Yeah.
So that's a really good point. And I think that there are other vows also, like when the elders do take position, they also take vows at that time. But I think what Daniel is wanting to emphasize for himself, particularly, is that it's better not to take a vow rather than going around flippantly just making vows here and there for anything and everything. And obviously that's not what we're promoting. We're not saying just take every single vow and promise everything before God. That's not what we're saying, but and that's not what the Westminster Confession of Faith is saying. It's saying be serious about any vow that you would take.
Okay.
And when we do take vows, we want to make sure that we know who we're making the vow to. Whether it's an oath or a vow, it's always going to be before God.
Okay.
So we want to be serious about it. Now, the part that I would, I don't know if this is what Daniel is saying or not, but if Daniel is saying that's why I'm not going to take any vows, then I would disagree with that, and I would say I think there are areas in our lives where we do still take vows, and they're good things to take vows for. And we're not placing ourselves under the law by taking a vow. Okay.
The Westminster, for me, Confession of Faith goes a little bit beyond that, because it tells you that if you don't vow in certain circumstances, it's sinful. Honestly, I think that's where they step beyond and become my conscience. And honestly,
okay,
that I don't
so
agree with necessarily.
maybe,
So for instance, if somebody came to you, Pastor.
Sorry, Daniel, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Sure.
Please send a message to our chat group about which specific portion of the Westminster Confession of Faith you think takes it that far, and so that we could continue our conversation.
Sure.
But in terms of our time here together, it's up. And so if I could just ask everyone, if I could ask everyone just to say one thing that stuck out to you from our discussion today, that stuck out to you, something that was important for you, something that maybe you understood a little bit more, or something that you still have a question about. Maybe that could be something that you mentioned today.
So Pastor Peter, can I just make some clarification about what I just said? Like very
no,
quick.
Sorry, Samuel. Just because of time's sake, I want to.
No, I want to say that making
you could clarify.
No, just one sentence. Making vows. I don't mean it like we make vows all the time. I'm just saying, going back to Daniel's, like he said that do not make vows. I feel sorry, because the way how I interpret it. I don't say, of course we don't make vows all the time. It's not.
Yeah,
it's only for marriage vows, so it's not.
Great. Thank you, Samuel.
So he pointed out that he felt that he doesn't want to make a vow. That's my point. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Samuel.
It's
Steve pointed out that Daniel, you're not in the chat group. So if there is something that you want to say, you could just send me a message, and then I could send it to the chat group, or you can join the chat group if you want. Just let me know.
Okay.
Let's start with Steve. One sentence or so about something that stuck out to you.
I would like to say, well, oath of vows, be your yes, and your no. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I mean,
yeah, for me, I think I agree with Daniel that the vow is sometimes really, it's meaningless, and we always fail. So I think that's why we need Jesus.
okay, great. Daniel, would you like to go next?
I guess the thing that stuck out to me was well, there were several things, but I think there was, I think in my case that I need to study more the issue of vow under the Hebrew mentality in the Hebrew, and this issue of promise. So how the Westminster people are characterizing this as promissory vows, promissory oaths. I need to know a little more about that before I can actually go give any kind of definitive answer to all this.
Okay, good. Alex said in the chat, I still need to learn more about vows and oaths and their importance. Kind of left today with a hard time being able to think of a summary takeaway message. Great, thank you, Alex. Samuel, do you have something? Just a sentence, maybe? One sentence?
Well, I'm still learning, so I don't have an exact answer, but I mean, I don't want to agree or disagree with anybody, but I feel that whether or not we are taking oath or vows, it all comes down to our heart. Like we're making this, making a vow with God, and of course it's good that we need to be surrounded by the witnesses, but it's all about heart. It's all about heart. So necessary. It's not necessarily about the ceremony or the rituals. This one I agree. But if you want to make a vow, just do it. There's no risk.
Okay. Andrew?
I think from today's discussion, I learned that I found the dilemma that between man's incompetence and also, but also I want to trust God in like an El Shaddai, Almighty God. So I'm willing to take oath or vows or decision, just maybe decisions to, if it's good and just, in a though I know I might not able to, I mean, I'm incompetent, but if it's lawful, I will put my trust in God.